everyone, and welcome to Cooking with Hendy, Volume 6. Although we're not really cooking today, we're eating leftovers. So anyway, I want to talk to you about the SAQ that you posted, and your grade should be in for that now. And some things, maybe some mistakes that were made, and some things about why I think this is important. Now, you know the AP test is only going to be a 45-minute online test this year, so there can't be a DBQ on it. And also, there are not going to be any multiple choice questions. And I don't think they're going to assess the total knowledge you have of this class with a single SAQ. So to me, it makes sense that there are going to be 3 SAQs on this. So I want to really focus on these, make sure that you get the SAQs down really well. So to begin with, let's look at the SAQ that you all posted. And I want to go over some model answers and show you some places where people miss things. And hopefully you'll learn from that. So you do need to watch this video before you do today's assignment, which is another SAQ. So check ItsLearning for where you can find that. All right, let's get to it. Now here's the text of the SAQ. It says, use your knowledge of world history to answer all parts of the question that follows, and you have A, B, and C. And remember, I've taught you to label your answers A, B, and C. Now, A is an identify question. It says identify a non-aligned nation after the Second World War. And this one should be pretty easy. Really, all you have to do is give some content here, if you remember. So if you name a nation, a non-aligned nation after the Second World War, and it's a complete sentence, you'll get this. And the vast majority of you got this. The only case where people didn't get it, and it was just a few, is because they didn't write a complete sentence. They wrote something like that. So no, that's not going to work. Everything needs to be in a complete sentence. Now, let's look back at the question again. I'm not really going to go over C too much because you guys nailed that one pretty well. It was pretty explicit in the podcast that you listened to. They gave you 2 examples in the podcast. The examples were, of course, South Asia and India with a negotiated, more peaceful form of independence, and then Algeria, which was a bloody uprising. So B is the one that most people who didn't get 100 failed to get this point. So look at it. It says, explain one way the Second World War transformed global politics. So this one is more than identify. You have to explain something. And most people would name 2 things that may have been consecutive but never really connect them. It lacked that explanatory element. So let's look at a few examples. So here's one. After World War II, global politics was divided into 2 groups, those nations who followed the United States and nations who followed the Soviet Union. Now, those are true statements. You do have these 2 spheres of influence, but there's nothing that explains how World War II led to that. And this was a common mistake. Even more common was when people brought up the Suez Crisis, which I did mention in the podcast. So here's an example. After World War II, the United States became a major global power. This can be seen in the Suez Crisis. Great Britain was shown to be weak in Egypt, and the United States demonstrated its rise to dominance in terms of world power. All that's true as well. But this is more about the Suez Crisis, and it doesn't really explain how World War II led to that. Remember, the Suez Crisis in the podcast was simply mentioned as the indicator that a shift had taken place, that Britain no longer had the means to just do whatever it wanted to in the world, and that the United States had risen to preeminence. Now, what a correct answer for B would look like is to talk about the Second World War, how it weakened France and Britain, or how after the Allies defeated Germany, they were so weak that there were only 2 major superpowers left, the US and the Soviet Union. To see how that connects it directly to World War II. Now, here's an example that a student wrote that does that. It makes that explicit connection. So it says, damaged by the war, look at that, damaged by the war, an economic crisis and experiencing the loss of their colonies as independent movements became more widespread, Britain no longer stood at the top of the political hierarchy. Instead, the United States and the Soviet Union rose to fill the vacuum, especially with the United States' wealth from World War I and World War II, as they exported goods and did not have damaged infrastructure since neither wars were fought on U.S. soil. Look how many connections there are here with the war in a cause and effect way. The economic crisis that came because of the damage of the war, and the United States gained wealth from World War II. All these things make this a fantastic answer. So if you got an 85 on this, which is a 2 out of 3, it most likely is because you didn't have that element to it. So remember this when you write the SAQ today. Explain really has to make an explicit connection. Now again, it doesn't have to be as developed as the analysis is in an LEQ or in a DBQ, but that explanatory element has to be there. When you're done, look at it and ask yourself if you've really answered the complete question. If you've explained something, shown cause and effect, or made a comparison like you had to do in C in that last question. And fixing those items and taking care of those weaknesses will push your essays up into the 3s out of 3s, which is 100 in here. And a lot of people did make 100, but I think the most common answer was a 2 out of 3, which, as an old song said, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, but we're looking for 3s here. So you'll find in ItsLearning the link to go and do this. This one will be different. It'll be in ItsLearning, and good luck to you, and be safe.